Number 7. The death of Whitey Bulger. After spending numerous years near the top of the FBI's most wanted list, notorious gangster James Whitey Bulger was finally arrested in 2011. During his criminal trial, which took place 2 years later, he was convicted of killing at least 13 people in his capacity as the leader of South Boston's infamous Winter Hill Gang. Bulger was consequently sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 5 years. It emerged in court that the organized crime boss had been an FBI informant for several years. Started in 1975, although Bulger himself vehemently denied the revelations. In return for the information he provided to the authorities, Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang were effectively ignored by local police, according to court documents. His association with the FBI reputedly came to an end in 1999, when he was officially deemed the agency's most wanted fugitive, second only to Osama bin Laden. Bulger and his longtime girlfriend were taken into custody outside an apartment complex in Santa Monica, California, in June of 2011. Despite his adamant denial of having had any involvement with federal authorities, Bulger's perceived ties to the FBI quickly made him the target of other inmates in the prison system. On October 30th of 2018, he was transferred to the United States Penitentiary Hazleton near Brewston Mills, West Virginia. Within hours of his arrival at the high-security facility, Bulger was reportedly ambushed by a group of inmates. The assailants attacked the 89-year-old man with a sock-wrapped padlock and a shiv. When his body was found by prison guards, Bulger was described as unrecognizable due to the fact that his eyes had nearly been gouged out and his tongue almost cut off. It was reported that investigators had identified Massachusetts-based mafia hitman Fortius Geas as the primary suspect in Bulger's murder. Number 6. REAGAN Widener. The Special Investigative Unit at the Oklahoma County Detention Center, or OCDC, conducted routine employee searches in December of 2021 as part of its ongoing efforts to prevent contraband items from entering the facility. During the search, investigators reportedly found an unauthorized cell phone in the possession of a detention officer named REAGAN Widener. In her subsequent interviews with the Special Investigative Unit, Widener allegedly confessed to having previously smuggled tobacco into the detention center. She also admitted to delivering packages containing illegal substances to an inmate for which she'd been paid a reported $2,000. Upon searching her vehicle, officers found marijuana, a loaded handgun, and a digital scale. She was consequently booked into county jail and charged with distribution of a controlled substance, possession with intent to distribute, use of a firearm while committing a felony, and carrying a weapon, drugs, or alcohol into jail. Widener was terminated from her position at the OCDC following her arrest. It was reported by the Oklahoma City Free Press that the center had fired a total of 3 detention officers in the final week of 2021. Number 5. Scott Raymond Dozier. Scott Raymond Dozier was found unresponsive in his cell at the maximum security prison in Ely, Nevada, in January of 2019. The 48-year-old had been on death row since 2007, when he was convicted in separate cases involving the killing of his drug trade associates. On several occasions while he was incarcerated, Dozier indicated that he preferred death to living the remainder of his years behind bars. His execution had been postponed in November of 2017 after concerns were raised regarding the untried drug regimen that would be used during his lethal injection, which could have left him suffocating, conscious, and unable to move his body. The postponement prompted Dozier to draft a handwritten note to the state court judge in charge of his case, pleading for his lethal injection to proceed as scheduled, even if suffering is inevitable. A different judge stopped his execution a second time in July of 2018, citing the same concerns over the 3-drug combination that had never been used in the United States before. State lawyers detailed how Dozier had attempted to take his own life multiple times while he was imprisoned, including by obtaining drops of a deadly drug on a piece of paper that was sent in through prison mail. At 4:35 p.m. on January the 5th of 2019, he was found dead in his cell from an apparent hanging. Number 4. Edward Muhammad Johnson. On July the 18th of 2018, a prison guard at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Stillwater was murdered by an inmate. Subsequent reports revealed that the deadly attack had occurred after the suspect, 44-year-old Edward Muhammad Johnson, had checked out a hammer from the facility's metal shop. He subsequently used the hand tool to strike prison guard Joseph Gom. Following the incident, the detention facility was placed on a month-long lockdown. It was also reported that 3 guards resigned from their posts and other security officials demanded more surveillance cameras and staffing in vocational workshops in response to Gomes' killing. At the time, Johnson was serving a 29-year prison sentence for stabbing his roommate in 2002. In October of 2020, he pleaded guilty to a charge of first-degree murder via video conference from the maximum security prison at Oak Park Heights. Court records indicated that Washington District Court Judge Ellen Maas immediately sentenced Johnson to life in prison without parole, citing state law that makes such a sentence mandatory in cases involving the murder of a law enforcement officer. The Associated Press reported that the slain guard's family planned to sue the Department of Corrections in connection to alleged oversights in the security measures taken by the prison. Number 3. Joseph Tate and Jesse Lopez. Two inmates at Autry State Prison in Mitchell County, Georgia, orchestrated an elaborate fraud operation directly from their shared jail cell during the mid-2010s. In all, Joseph Tate and Jesse Lopez reportedly swindled millions of dollars from unsuspecting civilians who'd fallen victims to their jury duty scam. The two cellmates used contraband cell phones that they obtained with the help of a third accomplice identified as Reginald Perkins to carry out their scheme. As detailed in subsequent reports, Tate and Lopez would make cold calls to residents of wealthy neighborhoods throughout the United States. During the calls, they would pose as law enforcement officers and falsely inform their victims that they had missed their court-mandated jury duty and would therefore be arrested if they failed to pay a fine. Perkins used his connections outside of prison to help secure wire transfers from the individuals who'd been victimized by Tate and Lopez. The fraud was eventually uncovered when one of their victims, 50-year-old Kaj Miller, followed up with her local county sheriff's office after receiving one of the scam phone calls. Miller later testified against Tate and Lopez during their ensuing criminal trial. The U.S. attorney in Georgia ultimately filed charges against 51 individuals who'd aided in the scam's execution. Tate, a drug dealer who was only a few years into a 40-year prison term, was given an extended sentence following the trial. Lopez, who was serving a 10-year sentence for 2 robbery convictions, was only sentenced to 3 years of probation. Today's topic was requested by CJ27333, Homeless in America, Teb MC34, and Eardrawn Eared. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Timothy Dunigan and Trinity BUSSLER. In early June of 2019, an inmate at Baldwin State Prison near Milledgeville, Georgia, was brutally murdered by 2 other prisoners who were named as Timothy Dunigan and Trinity BUSSLER. The victim, David Watson, had been serving a 25-year sentence prior to his killing. As was detailed during the case's pre-trial hearing in July of 2021, the suspects initiated their assault on Watson by choking him. Before the lack of oxygen caused the victim to fall unconscious, however, his attackers stabbed him several times in the face, neck, and lower back. The stab wounds would later be identified as the official cause of death. Watson was subsequently placed back in his bunk and his body was set ablaze. The authorities never publicly revealed what they'd believed to have been the motive for the deadly assault. Dunigan and BUSSLER were charged with murder, and District Attorney T. Wright Barksdale III announced that the state of Georgia intended to seek the death penalty against both of them. At the time of the homicide, Dunigan was serving a 20-year prison sentence for armed robbery, while BUSSLER had been incarcerated for multiple counts of burglary and false imprisonment. The latter was also the person of interest in a second murder investigation involving the death of Yaritza Serta, which had occurred on August the 30th of 2018. BUSSLER had been released on probation only a few months prior to Serta's murder and, upon being identified as a suspect, was remanded into custody in September. Number 1. Jaime OSUNA. In the early morning hours of March the 9th of 2019, Luis Romero was methodically tortured and killed in his cell at California's Corcoran State Prison. According to the Los Angeles Times, the perpetrator was his cellmate, Jaime OSUNA, who reportedly used a makeshift knife to carry out the gruesome murder. State documents detailed how Romero was eventually decapitated by OSUNA, who then proceeded to remove an eye, a finger, and a portion of the man's lung. After mutilating the corpse, he allegedly manipulated Romero's body into a pose in their cell, slicing the ends of his mouth to make it appear as if he was smiling. Upon making their nightly rounds through the cell block, the prison guards on duty at the time had reportedly failed to notice the horrific scene left behind by OSUNA. and they subsequently logged that both men were alive. The Times reported that the guards later found OSUNA wearing a necklace made of Romero's body parts. The incident prompted multiple investigations into why he'd been placed in a cell with OSUNA in the first place, as the latter was a self-proclaimed Satanist with a history of violence towards cellmates. There were also unanswered questions as to how the prison guards hadn't noticed the murder sooner, and a report by the State Inspector General's office alleged that they'd failed to properly conduct the counts. Romero's family filed a lawsuit against the Corcoran prison sergeant in which they claimed that the cell bars had been covered by a white sheet while OSUNA performed the murder, suggesting the guards hadn't thoroughly checked the cell in its entirety that night. OSUNA was at one point deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. It was reported in January of 2022, however, that the psychiatrist assigned to examine him had filed documents stating that he had regained competency, which would allow the murder case to move forwards. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have to share a prison cell with your worst enemy, or become homeless and lose all contact with your family? Let us know in the comments section below.